In the quiet town of Umuokpara, where red earth clung stubbornly to sandals and the evening breeze carried the sweet, smoky scent of roasted corn, love lived quietly in a small cement house at the end of a narrow, dusty road. The house was modest. Its zinc roof rattled whenever the wind picked up, and the paint on the walls had long faded into uneven patches of cream and grey. But inside that small home, laughter echoed freely. Dreams were spoken out loud without hesitation, and hope sat comfortably on the wooden dining table. Rose was not the most educated woman in town. She did not attend city schools or carry certificates that impressed anyone. But she was wise in ways that mattered far more than letters on paper. She knew how to stretch a small pot of soup to feed unexpected guests. She knew how to calm a crying child with nothing but a gentle voice. She knew how to love without keeping score, without conditions, without hesitation. Most importantly, Rose believed in partnership. She believed that marriage was not a contest, but a collaboration. She respected her husband, Calvin, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely saw his worth. She believed in forever, not the storybook kind, but the kind that survived hardship, endured patience, and grew stronger with every challenge. Calvin, her husband, was different. He was ambitious, restless, determined to escape the limitations of a small town. He worked at the local building supply store, but his mind often wandered far beyond the dusty streets of Umuokpara. He dreamed of Lagos, the city where fortunes were made, where opportunity waited, and where a determined man could become more than his circumstances allowed. They had little. Very little. A thin mattress, mismatched chairs, and a small kitchen that struggled to contain their dreams. But they had each other. And for a while, that felt like enough. When their son was born, the entire neighborhood gathered to celebrate. Women all related, elders nodded, and Calvin held the baby high, his face glowing with pride and something deeper, purpose. His name shall be Obinna, Calvin declared, his voice full of conviction. My father's heart. The neighbors clapped. Rose, still weak from childbirth, smiled through tears. Watching her husband hold their son, she felt safe. She felt chosen. She felt certain that no matter what life threw at them, they would face it together. Calvin laughing, rocking baby Obinna in his arms, one day I will take you to Lagos. You won't fetch water again. You won't wake up at dawn to queue at the well. Rose, just don't forget this small house when Lagos makes you big. Calvin, forget. Never. This house is where our story begins. Every big thing starts small. And in that moment, they both believed it. Life moved gently at first. Rose woke before sunrise each day, sweeping the compound, boiling water, and preparing pap for Obinna before school. She sold akara along the roadside, frying the bean cakes in hot oil while greeting every customer with warmth and a smile that made them return the next day. Calvin worked long hours and sometimes traveled to nearby towns for supplies. Each trip changed him slightly, sharper clothes, newer gadgets, more sophisticated words. He began talking about opportunities, networks, and expansion. Rose listened with admiration, never threatened by his ambition. She believed in him, and she believed in them. When Calvin finally announced he had a big opportunity in Lagos, Rose did not resist. She knew the city was calling him, and she would not be the one to chain him to Umuokpara. If it will make our future better, she said softly, then go. He promised it was for them, for their family. For Obinna. And so, with a bus ride and a cloud of red dust, Calvin left, leaving Rose to hold the house together while nurturing their son. At first, the calls were frequent, the messages full of excitement. Money came regularly, helping Rose repair the roof, buy a new mattress, and enroll Obinna in a better school. She remained strong, managing everything with grace. The neighbors admired her patience and dedication. But life had a way of shifting quietly. Over time, the calls became less frequent. The promises of soon became delays. And Rose began to notice a subtle distance in her husband's words, the warmth she once knew replaced by busyness and distraction. Even in their small cement house, love was still alive, but it was being tested. Rose held on to her faith, believing that forever meant staying even when things got hard. She believed that no matter how far Calvin went, the bond they had built, the home they had created, and the child they had nurtured would always keep them connected. And as the sun set over Umuokpra, casting long shadows over the red earth, Rose stood in the doorway, holding Obinna close. She whispered softly, almost to herself. Whatever comes, we will endure. We will rise. We will survive. And love will remain. In that quiet moment, the small cement house at the end of the narrow road felt larger than ever. Because in it lived hope, resilience, and a woman whose heart was stronger than destiny itself. The problem with ambition is not dreaming. It is forgetting who held you while you dreamed. When farming profits dropped in Umuokpra, Calvin began speaking of Lagos. Not just as a place, but as a promise. He called it the city of lights. The city of money. The city that turned ordinary men into important men. At first, he mentioned it casually while washing his hands after supper. Things are tight, he would say. The harvest isn't what it used to be. Rose would nod. She had seen the numbers. She had stretched meals. She had sold 2 of her wrappers quietly to balance what pride could not. But then Lagos became a regular guest at their table. He spoke of friends who had gone and returned in December with new cars and city accents. He spoke of construction contracts, oil servicing companies, real estate agents who made in 1 month what farmers made in a year. He spoke with fire in his eyes. And Rose saw something else in those eyes too, restlessness. One humid evening, as kerosene lights flickered against their cement walls, Calvin finally said the words he had been rehearsing in his heart. "I must go," he said softly. Rose looked up from folding their son's clothes. "For us." Those 2 words always make sacrifice easier. For us. She felt the fear rise in her throat like smoke. Lagos was far. Lagos was loud. Lagos swallowed people whole and returned them changed. But she swallowed her fear. Because good wives support dreams. Even when dreams carry risk. Even when dreams carry distance. She nodded. "If it is for us," she said quietly, "then go." He reached for her hand that night. Held it longer than usual. Promised it would only be for a short time. Promised he would return successful. Promised she would never regret believing in him. Promises are easy in small towns. 2 weeks later, he left. The morning bus coughed dust into the red earth as it pulled away. Rose stood by the roadside with their son tied to her back, waving until the bus became nothing but a memory on the horizon. That first night without him felt too quiet. Too wide. Too empty. But the phone rang. "I've arrived safely," Calvin said. His voice sounded excited. Alive. Like a man stepping into a new version of himself. Calls came daily at first. He described tall buildings that touched the sky. Traffic that refused to move. Opportunities everywhere. He said he had met someone who knew someone who could connect him to a contractor. Rose listened carefully. Encouraging. Asking questions. Laughing when he laughed. She told him about home too. About their son's cough. About the neighbor's goat that kept entering their compound. About the small repairs the roof needed before rainy season. They were still a team. Then daily calls became weekly. He said work was hectic. Networking required time. Lagos did not sleep. Rose understood. She began waking earlier to tend the farm alone. She carried produce to market herself. She bargained harder. Counted coins twice. Prayed more. She never complained. When the weekly calls became rare, she told herself not to be insecure. "This is how success works," she would whisper at night. "It demands everything first." Sometimes the phone would ring at midnight. His voice would sound tired, distant. "Things are moving," he would say vaguely. "Just keep praying." She wanted details. She wanted to know where he stayed, who he spent time with, what exactly was moving. But she swallowed those questions. Because doubt is dangerous in marriage. Months passed. December approached. Other men from Umokpra returned for Christmas, louder, flashier, heavier with city confidence. Their wives wore new lace. Their children carried plastic toys that made foreign sounds. Rose waited. Calvin did not come. He said a big deal was closing. He couldn't risk leaving. "It's for our future," he reminded her. She nodded into the phone. "For us." But something had shifted. His voice no longer carried her name with softness. He rarely asked about the farm now. Rarely asked about their daughter's school fees. When she mentioned challenges, he changed the subject to opportunities. Opportunities. The word began to sound like distance. One evening, after 3 weeks without hearing from him, Rose sat on the edge of their bed and stared at the wall they had once painted together. The problem with ambition, she realized, was not dreaming. It was forgetting who held you while you dreamed. She had held him when the harvest failed. She had held him when doubts whispered he was not enough. She had held him when Lagos was only a story told under dim light. Now Lagos was real. And she was becoming a memory. Still, she prayed. Still, she believed. Because love, she told herself, must endure seasons. Even the seasons where silence grows louder than promises. And somewhere in the city of lights, under neon signs and unfinished contracts, Calvin was chasing importance. But Rose was beginning to understand something deeper. A man can travel to find success. But if he forgets the hands that steadied him at the start, he may return rich and still come back empty. Lagos does not test your strength. It tests your loyalty. When Calvin left Umuokpra, he did not leave as a wicked man. He left as a hungry one. Hungry for success. Hungry for relevance. Hungry to prove that he was bigger than red soil roads and evening palm wine conversations. Rose had stood by him when he had nothing but plans and promises. She sold her gold earrings to help him settle in Lagos. She endured the whispers of neighbors who said, "City changes men." She defended him. At first, Lagos was harsh but fair. Calvin worked late nights, shared cramped apartments, and called home every evening. He would ask about the children, about the leaking roof, about Rose's small provisions shop. His voice would soften when she prayed for him before hanging up. Then came the corporate event. Calvin had just secured a junior position in a fast-growing firm. The event was filled with sharp suits, polite laughter, and ambition floating in the air like expensive perfume. That was where he met Nkem. Nkem was everything Lagos celebrated. Educated. Stylish. City smart. She spoke with confidence, moved with intention, and carried herself like a woman who had never waited for anyone to save her. She admired ambition, not history. She asked Calvin about his 5-year plan, not his past. She liked his hunger. She liked that he was building something. Their first conversations were harmless. Networking. Business advice. Encouragement. Calvin told himself it was just professional alignment. But admiration is a quiet spark. It does not announce when it becomes fire. Soon, admiration turned to intimacy. Late-night strategy meetings became late-night dinners. Work calls became personal confessions. Calvin stopped mentioning Rose. When Kem asked if he was married, he hesitated just long enough to betray the truth. It's complicated, he said. Intimacy turned to secrecy. Calvin began sending less money home. His calls to Rose became shorter. Sometimes he would not pick up at all. He blamed workload, Lagos pressure, network issues. Rose wanted to believe him. She chose to believe him. Secrecy became betrayal. In Lagos, betrayal rarely feels dramatic. It feels justified. Calvin convinced himself that he deserved happiness. That Rose would not understand his new world. That he had outgrown the life he once promised to protect. What began as an affair quietly transformed into a second life. Nkem did not ask about Umuokpara. She asked about investments. About property. About future expansion. Calvin felt seen. Important. Modern. Back in Umuokpara, Rose kept waiting. One afternoon, a trader returning from Lagos arrived with market goods and fresh gossip. News travels faster than vehicles in small towns. Women gathered under the mango tree as he spoke. I saw him, the trader said casually. Your husband? He has remarried. The wedding was small. In Lagos. The words landed like thunder without rain. Rose was inside, washing rice in a metal bowl. When the message reached her ears, her hands froze. The bowl slipped. It hit the ground. It shattered. The sharp sound echoed across the compound. Just like her marriage. Calvin did not return to Umuokpara immediately. For weeks after the news broke, silence sat heavily in Rose's compound. Neighbors avoided direct questions. Pity moved around her like a shadow. But Rose did not chase explanations. She waited. Then one dry morning, a dusty SUV rolled into the village square. Calvin had returned. He stepped out wearing dark sunglasses and a crisp shirt that spoke of Lagos money. But beneath the polished appearance was a stiffness, the discomfort of a man who knew the ground he once owned no longer recognized him. He did not go home first. He went to the elders. In Umuokpara, marriage was not just between two people. It was between families. Between lineages. What had been joined publicly could not be broken privately. The elders gathered under the ancient udala tree, their walking sticks resting against wooden stools. Rose's uncles were present. Calvin's kinsmen too. Rose arrived last. She wore no dramatic mourning cloth. No swollen eyes. No trembling hands. Just a simple wrapper and blouse. Dignity stitched into every step. Calvin cleared his throat. Respected elders, he began, voice controlled, rehearsed. City life is different. Lagos changes responsibilities. Opportunities come. Expectations change. I have moved forward. The words were smooth. Detached. He avoided saying remarriage. Avoided saying betrayal. He spoke as if transition were natural. As if abandonment were evolution. One elder leaned forward. Are we to understand you have taken another wife? A pause. Yes. Murmurs rose and fell like restless wind. Calvin continued, it is better we end this properly. Peacefully. There should be no hostility between families. Properly. Peacefully. As though proper peace could grow from planted deceit. All eyes turned to Rose. She stood slowly. For a moment, Calvin expected tears. Anger. Pleading. Something to justify his escape. But Rose's face carried no storm. Her voice, when it came, was steady. You. The simplicity of it unsettled him. She continued, her gaze fixed not on Calvin, but on the circle of elders. But this child, she said, resting her hand gently on her son's shoulder, will know who stayed. The sentence settled deeper than accusation ever could. It was not a curse. Not a threat. Just truth. Calvin shifted in his seat. An elder nodded solemnly. Then the bride price must be returned. Tradition demanded balance. What was paid to seal union would be refunded to dissolve it. It was not a refund of love. It was a formal closure. Rose's family disappeared briefly into the house and returned with the items carefully accounted for, the symbolic money, the drinks, the tokens that once represented honor and commitment. Each item was placed before Calvin's family. No drama. No shouting. Just finality. When the last kola nut was set down, the eldest man raised his staff. From today, this marriage is dissolved. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of history. Calvin stood. For a brief second, he looked at Rose as if expecting her to break. To call him back. To soften the decision. She did not. The SUV engine roared again later that afternoon, carrying him back to Lagos, back to ambition, glass buildings, and a life that now had no bridge to Umuopra. As the dust settled, Rose remained standing in the compound. The marriage had ended. But something stronger had begun. Not revenge. Not bitterness. Resolve. For the first time since the bow shattered, Rose felt the ground beneath her feet as her own. Rose did not cry in public again. The morning after the final court papers were signed, she opened her small wooden jewelry box. Inside were the last symbols of a life she once believed in, her gold wedding band, the coral beads Calvin bought her during their first Christmas in Lagos, the thin chain she wore the day her son was born. She ran her fingers over them, not with bitterness, but with clarity. By noon, she had sold them. It was not enough to rebuild a life, but it was enough to begin one. Instead of hiding inside her father's house in Umuokpra and listening to whispers from neighbors who measured women by their marital status, Rose traveled to Onitsha. The market there was loud, unapologetic, and alive, just like the version of herself she was trying to resurrect. Onitsha main market was overwhelming at first. Traders shouted prices. Buses honked impatiently. Porters balanced impossible loads on their heads. The smell of dried fish, palm oil, spices, and sweat hung thick in the air. But Rose did not flinch. She bought bags of rice, beans, gari, palm oil, crayfish. Basic foodstuff people needed every single day, because she had learned something about survival, luxury fades, but necessity endures. The next morning, she woke at 4 a.m. Not because anyone forced her, but because she refused to be pitted. While Umuokpra still slept under a blanket of early dawn mist, Rose would already be bathing, tying her wrapper firmly around her waist, lifting her basket. She would board the first bus to Onitsha, sometimes standing for hours, sometimes squeezed between traders who smelled of long journeys and determination. By 9 a.m., she was back in town, arranging her goods neatly in front of the small shop space she rented beside a mechanic workshop. She did not beg customers. She did not tell stories of her failed marriage. She simply walked. At first, some people came only to stare. Is that not Calvin's ex-wife? Such a shame. Rose ignored them. Shame does not feed a child. Profit does. Weeks turned into months. Her hands grew rough from measuring rice and tying nylon bags. Her shoulders ached from lifting sacks heavier than her past. But slowly, customers returned, not because they pitied her, but because her measurements were honest and her prices fair. At night, when she and her son Chisholm sat under the dim bulb in their small rented room, she would open his school books carefully. Even when her eyes burned from exhaustion, she made sure he read aloud. One evening, when Chisholm asked, "Mama, why do you work so hard? Other women say you should remarry." Rose paused. She looked at her son, her only witness to her fall and her rising. Then she said quietly, "Family. Education is our revenge. Not revenge against Calvin. Not revenge against gossip. But revenge against limitation." Revenge against poverty. Revenge against every voice that believed a woman's story ends when a man leaves. And every 4 a.m. morning, as she stepped into the darkness heading toward Onitsha again, Rose was no longer running from her past. She was building a future that would answer it. Obinna took his mother's words and carved them into his spirit. Education is our revenge. While other boys in Umokpura chased quick money or spent long evenings at viewing centers arguing over European football, Obinna stayed inside with his books. The small room he shared with his mother doubled as his classroom, library, and war room. The kerosene lamp often smoked, stinging his eyes, but he refused to complain. He had seen his mother wake at 4 a.m. for years. The least he could do was stay awake a few hours longer. He studied relentlessly. When his classmates slept, he revised mathematics. When they mocked his seriousness, he practiced past questions. When they said, life is about connections, he quietly built competence. Rose never pressured him with fear. She motivated him with vision. Your mind, she would say, tapping his forehead gently, is the only inheritance I can guarantee. The day his admission letter arrived, the entire compound gathered. He had been offered admission to study computer engineering at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Rose held the letter like fragile glass. She did not scream. She did not dance. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, God." University life tested him. There were strikes. There were financial constraints. Sometimes Rose had to travel twice a week to Onitsha just to send extra money. Obinna took small coding jobs online. He repaired classmates' laptops. He skipped unnecessary outings. He graduated with a first class. When his name was announced during the convocation ceremony, Rose stood up before she even realized she had. Tears streamed down her face as she clapped, her palms rough from years of trading. People turned to look at the proud woman who seemed to understand that this victory had been paid for long before today. But destiny was not done. Months later, an email arrived. Obinna had won a fully funded scholarship to pursue a master's degree in artificial intelligence in the U. The same boy who once studied under a smoking kerosene lamp was now boarding an international flight. Before he left, Rose hugged him tightly at the airport in Lagos. "Remember where you are from," she said. Abroad, Obinna excelled again. He absorbed knowledge like dry soil absorbs rain. He interned at tech firms. He published research. He built networks. Offers came, tempting ones. Stay back. Earn in pounds. Build a life there. But every time he thought of settling permanently, he remembered his mother standing in Onitsha main market at dawn. So he returned to Nigeria. Specifically, he returned to Lagos, loud, chaotic, ambitious Lagos, where dreams either suffocate or scale. He started a tech company focused on building affordable digital solutions for small and medium-sized businesses. He hired young Nigerian developers. He trained interns for free. He built tools that help traders manage inventory and accept digital payments, tools his mother could have used years ago. Within 5 years, the company grew beyond expectation. Investors came. Partnerships formed. Media houses began to tell the story of the young tech CEO who chose home over comfort. And somewhere in Lagos, at the launch event of his company's new headquarters, Rose sat in the front row, dressed simply but elegantly. As Obinna stepped onto the stage to speak, cameras flashing, applause echoing, he caught her eye. Irony smiled. The woman once whispered about in Umokpura as the divorce trader was now introduced as the mother of one of Nigeria's rising tech entrepreneurs. Education had indeed been their revenge. Not loud. Not bitter. But undeniable. Success is loud. Failure is louder, but only inside the mind. While Obinna's tech company expanded in Lagos, Calvin's empire began to shrink quietly. Investments he once boasted about at exclusive lounges in Victoria Island started collapsing one after another. A risky real estate deal failed. A partner diverted funds. The market shifted. The numbers stopped adding up. For the first time in years, Calvin could not control the outcome. The cars went first. Then one of the properties. Then the confidence. Nkem, who had once admired his ambition and enjoyed the comfort that came with it, grew distant. Conversations turned into arguments. Arguments turned into silence. Silence turned into separate rooms. "I didn't sign up for struggle," she said one evening, her voice flat, almost unfamiliar. Calvin had no response. The irony was cruel. The same pride that had once pushed him away from Rose now stood between him and humility. He wanted to fight for the marriage, but he didn't know how to fight without money. Within a year, Nkem left. The house felt bigger. Emptier. The friends who once flooded his phone with invitations to private parties stopped calling. The business associates who praised his vision no longer replied to his messages. The group chats grew silent whenever he typed. Calvin began to understand something Rose had known years ago: some relationships are loyal only to comfort. One evening, sitting alone in his modest apartment, he flipped through television channels absent-mindedly. News. Politics. Sports. Then he froze. On the screen was a familiar face, older, sharper, confident. Obinna. The caption read, "Tech Innovator launches new SME digital platform." Calvin sat up. The interviewer smiled. "You've spoken often about your journey. Who would you say shaped you the most?" Obinna did not hesitate. "My mother," he said. Calvin's throat tightened. "She was both father and mother," Obinna continued calmly. "She taught me that dignity is not given by marriage, money, or society. It is built by sacrifice and education." The studio audience applauded. Calvin felt something inside him crack. He leaned closer to the television, studying the young man's posture, his voice, the resemblance he could no longer deny. The son he had watched from a distance. The son whose school fees he once delayed sending out of pride. The son whose graduation he attended but never truly celebrated. Now that son was speaking about strength, and it was not him being honored. It was Rose. "My mother sold her jewelry to start a foodstuff business," Obinna added. "She woke up at 4 a.m. every day. If you see me here today, it's because she refused to be pitied." Calvin muted the television. The room felt smaller. Memories flooded him, Rose laughing in their small cement house in Umuokpra. Rose supporting his ambitions when he had nothing but dreams. Rose believing in partnership. In forever. He had mistaken loyalty for weakness. He had confused quiet strength with dependency. Now, the world was applauding the woman he once walked away from. Regret did not shout. It crept in slowly. It sat beside him on the couch. It replayed every decision. For the first time in his life, Calvin understood that success without integrity is fragile. That pride can bankrupt more than a business. That living is easy, rebuilding trust is not. As the television screen shifted to another segment, Calvin remained seated in silence. And somewhere deep inside him, regret began. The journey back home was nothing like the one he made years ago. When Calvin first left, he traveled with confidence. A new suitcase. A pressed shirt. Big promises in his mouth. Lagos had called him then, and he answered like a man certain of his future. He had told Rose, "I will return bigger. Better. Wealthy." Now he returned with none of those things. No car waited for him at the motor park. No friends came to receive him. The city that once made him feel important had quietly swallowed him and spat him out. His business had collapsed after reckless investments. The friends who toasted his success vanished when the money stopped flowing. Nkem, who once admired his ambition, packed her bags the moment the comfort disappeared. Calvin traveled home in silence. He sat by the window of the bus, watching familiar landscapes roll past, red earth roads, cassava farms, children chasing tires with sticks. Each sight felt like a mirror reflecting what he had abandoned. He remembered the day he stood before the elders to finalize the divorce. He had spoken boldly then. "City life is different," he had said. Rose had not cried. She had simply looked at him with calm strength and replied, "You may leave. But this child will know who stayed." Those words now echoed louder than the bus engine. When the bus finally stopped at the junction leading into his village, Calvin stepped down slowly. He carried one small bag. No car. No pride. Just regret. The villagers noticed him immediately. News travels fast in small towns. Some whispered. Some pretended not to see him. A few nodded politely, but there was no admiration in their eyes anymore. Only quiet understanding. He walked the narrow road that once led him to his former home, the cement house at the end where Rose had once waited in the evenings. The paint was fresher now. The compound cleaner. The place looked alive. He paused at the gate. Children's laughter floated through the air. Among them, he recognized a familiar voice, deeper now, stronger. Obinna. His son. Calvin swallowed hard. The last time he had truly spoken to his son was years ago. Before the scholarship. Before the first-class graduation. Before the television interview where Obinna said, "My mother was both father and mother." That sentence had broken him. He did not knock immediately. Shame pressed against his chest. How does a man return to a place he walked away from? He finally raised his hand and tapped gently on the gate. Rose opened it. Time had matured her, not weakened her. There was strength in her posture. Peace in her eyes. She did not look surprised. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Calvin lowered his gaze. "I have come back," he said quietly. "Not to claim anything. Not to change anything. Just to say I was wrong." Rose studied him carefully. The arrogance was gone. The pride dissolved. What stood before her was not the man who left, but a humbled one. From inside, Obinna stepped out. Taller. Educated. Composed. Their eyes met. In that silence, Calvin understood something painful but powerful. He had traveled far to learn what loyalty truly meant. And now, standing without a car, without applause, without status, he realized the most difficult journey was not from Lagos to home. It was from pride to humility. The evening air stood still. Calvin had barely finished speaking when Obinna stepped forward. He was no longer the small boy who once ran after him in the compound, calling, "Daddy, wait." He stood tall now, educated, composed, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had earned his place in the world. Rose remained by the doorway, silent but steady. Calvin tried to speak again. His voice trembled. "Obinna, my son." Obinna lifted his hand gently, not in anger, but in restraint. "Sir," he began. The word struck harder than a slap. "Sir, you are mistaken." Calvin blinked, confused. "Mistaken?" Obinna's expression did not change. There was no hatred in it. Only clarity. "A father," Obinna continued calmly, "is the man who stays." The compound felt smaller. The sky darker. Calvin opened his mouth, but no words came. Every excuse he had rehearsed on the bus ride home suddenly sounded weak. Business failure. Bad friends. City pressure. They all faded in the presence of one undeniable truth. He had left. Obinna stepped closer to the gate, his voice still respectful but firm. "When I had school fees problems, my mother stayed. When I was mocked because my father lived in the city with another woman, my mother stayed. When I studied late into the night and almost gave up, my mother stayed." When I won that scholarship and the cameras came, she was there. He paused. You were not. Calvin's shoulder sank. Each word felt like a stone placed on his chest. Rose finally spoke, softly. Obinna. But Obinna shook his head gently. No, Mama. Let me finish. He looked back at Calvin, not as a son seeking approval, but as a man drawing boundaries. I do not hate you. Hate requires energy. And my energy has been used to build a life. He swallowed once. But fatherhood is not a title you return to claim when life becomes difficult. The silence that followed was heavy but dignified. Calvin felt the weight of every missed birthday. Every unanswered. Every decision made out of pride instead of responsibility. I was young, Calvin whispered weakly. Obinna nodded slowly. And I was younger. The words were gentle, yet devastating. Rose stepped beside her son now, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Not as protection, but as partnership. They had built something unbreakable in Calvin's absence. Calvin looked at them both. He realized something painful: they did not need him anymore. They had survived. Thrived, even. I came to say I was wrong, he murmured. Obinna gave a small, almost sympathetic nod. Then let that be enough. He reached for the gate. For a brief second, Calvin hoped for one more chance, one more conversation, one small opening. But growth sometimes means closure. As the gate slowly moved, Obinna spoke one final time. I wish you peace, sir. Not dad. Not father. Sir. The gate shut with a quiet but final click. Calvin stood outside, alone on the dusty road. No car. No pride. No legacy to return to. Inside the compound, life continued. Rose turned toward the house. Obinna walked beside her. Outside, Calvin remained still, staring at the closed gate, understanding at last that some doors do not slam in anger. They close in truth. And this one had closed forever. Success is not revenge. It is proof. Proof that endurance is not weakness. Proof that silent tears water unseen seeds. Proof that when dignity is preserved, destiny eventually responds. Rose sits peacefully in her new home. Respected. Complete. Not because life did not try to break her, but because she refused to break with it. The house is not the biggest in the neighborhood. It is not painted in loud colors to impress strangers. But it stands firm, like the woman who lives inside it. Cream walls. A neat compound. Potted plants she waters every evening after closing her shop. The small nameplate by the gate reads, Rose Obinna and Son. Years ago, she sat on a different floor, cold cement, holding her child while her marriage collapsed around her. Calvin had chosen the city. Chosen pride. Chosen temporary applause over permanent loyalty. He spoke boldly before elders then, explaining how city life is different. As if character changes with postcode. Rose did not argue. She returned the bride price through her family. She swallowed humiliation. She sold her jewelry, the gold bangles her mother gave her, the necklace Calvin once clasped around her neck with promises of forever. With that money, she started small. A foodstuff business. Rice. Beans. Gari. Palm oil measured carefully into transparent bottles. People whispered at first. Poor woman. She has suffered. She will struggle. She did struggle. But struggle did not shame her. It sharpened her. She woke before dawn. Carried sacks heavier than her pain. Learned to negotiate prices. Learned to smile at customers even on days her heart felt tired. She refused to speak ill of Calvin in front of their son. Your father is far, she would say gently. But you are not fatherless. Obinna washed. He watched his mother count coins under dim light. Watched her pray quietly before opening the shop. Watched her refuse shortcuts that would have brought quick money but stolen her peace. That boy studied with the same discipline she used to survive. Years passed. The shop expanded. One store became two. Two became a proper store. Suppliers began greeting her with respect. Madam Rose, they now called her. Not with pity, but with recognition. Obinna gained admission. Studied relentlessly. Graduated first class. Won a scholarship abroad. Returned to Nigeria not with arrogance, but with gratitude. And when he started his tech company in Lagos, he made sure his mother's name was on the first property he bought. That is how Rose moved into her new home. Not through revenge. Not through gossip. Not through bitterness. Through consistency. Sometimes in the quiet evenings, she sits on her veranda and watches the sunset paint the sky orange. There is no noise of arguments. No fear of abandonment. Only peace. The kind that money cannot buy and betrayal cannot steal. Across the country, Calvin once saw his son on television giving an interview. My mother was both father and mother, Obinna had said calmly. That was when regret began for him. But for Rose, there was no celebration of his regret. Only gratitude. Success is not revenge. It is proof. And Rose is living evidence that when a woman refuses to collapse under disrespect, life eventually crowns her with quiet honor. And so, as this story comes to an end, one truth remains clear. Life does not always reward noise. It rewards consistency. It does not always defend the loud. It often honors the patient. Rose did not win because someone lost. She did not rise because someone fell. She rose because she refused to stay down. Sometimes we think success is about proving people wrong. But the deeper victory is proving yourself strong. Strong enough to endure embarrassment. Strong enough to rebuild quietly. Strong enough to choose dignity when bitterness feels easier. If you look closely at Rose's journey, you'll notice something powerful. She never chased applause. She chased stability. She never chased revenge. She chased growth. And in doing that, respect found her naturally. Maybe you are in your small shop season right now. Maybe people are whispering. Maybe you feel overlooked. But seasons change. The same hands that count coins today can sign contracts tomorrow. The same child who watches your sacrifice today can become your pride tomorrow. The same pain that humbles you today can become the foundation of your strength tomorrow. Success is not revenge. It is proof that character matters, that endurance matters, that staying true to yourself matters. So wherever you are on your journey, don't rush the process. Don't let temporary disappointment define permanent decisions. Keep building. Keep learning. Keep showing up. And one day, like Rose, you will sit in your own version of peace, not because life was easy, but because you were resilient. Thank you for listening to this story. If it spoke to you, carry its lesson with you. Sometimes, the quiet victories are the loudest proof that you never gave up. Don't forget to subscribe for more that will come.